Martignetti nonprofit radio coverage of 20NTC. That's the 2020 Nonprofit Technology Conference. Regrettably, the conference in Baltimore had to be canceled, but we're persevering virtually via Zoom. We're sponsored at 20NTC by Cougar Mountain Software. Denali Fund is their complete accounting solution made for nonprofits. Tony.ma/Cougar Mountain for a free 60-day trial. My guest today is Sarah Durham. She is CEO of Big Duck and Advomatic. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me on the show today.
I'm glad it worked out that we could get together virtually, not being able to do it together in Baltimore. How are you doing? You're in Middle Massachusetts, yeah?
I'm a native New Yorker and I live and work in New York, but I have decamped to Massachusetts. Everything is fine here. Thank you for asking. I hope you're well too.
I am. I'm in my beach house in North Carolina. The beach is across the street. The beaches are open, so I can walk there because we don't get crowds on beaches. The town is too small. Nobody's heard of it, which is why I'm here. So we're gonna, NTC brought us together, but I'm gonna release this as a special episode of Nonprofit Radio because your deep expertise in communications and your NTC topic was creating kick-ass major donor communications, and with your permission, I'm gonna convert that to creating kick-ass coronavirus communications.
Please.
Okay, and we're recording this on Wednesday, March 24th, and we're gonna look for release on the next Monday, whichever day Monday is. That looks like the 30th. I think that's the 30th of March. We're gonna look to get this out. Let's talk about communicating with our donors, because there's going to be a time when fundraising is the message. I don't think that's the time. This is the time now, but what should we be saying to our committed donors? People are already giving to us. We're not trying to acquire anybody new at this stage. What should we be saying to people who are already loyal to us?
Well, first of all, I love that you're starting with this question of, the people that are already loyal to us. I think there's what should we be saying, how should we be saying it, and when should we be saying it? And certainly starting with your base is one of the most important things you can do right now. What you should be saying, I think, depends a lot on your mission and how affected your donors and the audiences you serve might be by what's going on right now. If you're in an area that's directly affected, then you want to speak to that very directly. But if you're not, you may want to be candid about what you're working on and what's going on in other ways.
What's going on? Can it be stories about how your employees are faring? You've got parent employees. You've got some maybe can't work remotely. You've people who do face-to-face, meetings maybe with beneficiaries. They can't do that. Can it be stories? Can it be like insider baseball?
It can and it can't. I did an interview recently with Seville Mihandar, who's one of the leaders at CCS Fundraising. And we were talking about exactly that. And we were agreeing in our conversation that in some cases, the first wave of communication should be the insider baseball. How is your team faring? But a lot of organizations have already done that. That happened in week one. For most organizations. The second wave of communications after you send the here's how we're faring really should be, I think, about your community and about your work. And beyond that, talking about what's going on in the future and how you're navigating. I mean, there are 5 or so principles that we've been advising our clients to use in terms of their tone and style. And I think a lot of it is about adapting those principles of tone and style in a few ways. But the other piece that I think is perhaps most critical is that you adapt your communications to be much more iterative, both in terms of how you plan and what you're doing. In other words, if you had a communications plan or strategy, probably it needs to be updated on a weekly basis. Every week, who are you communicating with? What are you trying to communicate? And what will feel appropriate from a tone and style point of view for those donors to hear from you this week, given what's happening?
How about those 5 principles? What are those?
Well, so the first one is to be authentic. One of the questions that we've been getting a lot is, should I be candid with our donors about the financial hit that our organization is taking? And our advice is, yes, you should be.
Absolutely.
You're gonna need to ask them for support, and you don't want to paint a rosy picture if that's not the reality for your organization.
I think a great example of that is Amy Sample Ward, CEO of N10.
Great
Her
example.
video, you see her wiping tears from her eyes in her video, explaining that that conference is 62% of their annual revenue. And now they've not only lost that revenue, but they have penalties to pay for all the contracts that they're breaking. So, she was, I think it's a great example. And obviously
I totally agree.
agreed. Authentic, heartfelt, sincere, she's tearful, and she didn't do a take two.
Yeah, no, Amy is a great example of an authentic leader in all contexts, and particularly if you haven't watched those videos on the N10 website, where she really, day by day, she was navigating, making a decision about when to cancel the conference and how to do that. That's arguably, I would say, the best example I've seen of an organization leader being proactive and authentic.
And N10.org, listeners know her very, very well. She's on the show every month, but N10.org. And yeah, you feel her anguish. You feel it's an excruciating decision, but one that has to be made.
Yeah. And Amy is also an example. Those videos are a great example of some of the other tips that we've been giving people. The second is to use your values, use the values of your organization. If you look at the way Amy did it in that communications, she talks about the values of the community, the values of connection that they share with each other. And she really leans into the organization's values to guide her decision-making. And we're encouraging all organizations to do that. She's also very human. And that's another thing that I think is really important right now. There are emails that we are all getting that are not at all acknowledging the situation that people are in. And those don't feel good right now. They feel inappropriate. So it's okay to be human. It's okay to reach out and call your major donors and say to them, how are you doing? Here's how I'm doing, and make a human connection. The compassion that we express for each other right now is what's going to bind us together. And
especially, right, exactly. That's a point I was just going to make. Yeah, this is what holds us together, is our common humanity. And, not only is it okay, don't you go out of your way to preserve your humanity in the face of uncertainty, financial loss, both personal and professional, on the organizational level and on the personal level. Those of us who have our own businesses, you have employees, go out of your way to preserve your humanity.
Absolutely. One of my employees at Big Duck, a copywriter named Lila Tublin, just wrote a piece that we are going to probably post on our blog in the next couple of days. It should be live by the time your show airs, about words to avoid during this crisis. Lila writes a very popular blog every year called Words to Avoid in the Nonprofit Sector. But this one is a sort of coronavirus specific set of words to avoid. And one of the words she recommends avoiding is social distancing. She talks in this piece about how what we want to engage in right now is physical distancing. We don't need social distancing. We actually need social connections more than ever. So
that's a good distinction.
So let's work on staying apart physically, but actually with your donors, staying in touch and being human and making that personal connection with them is what's going to weave the social capital you have with them in an even tighter way, which is whether or not they're going to donate to you or have the capacity to donate to you right now is just the right thing to do.
Yeah. What's where do people find that blog?
It's going to be on bigduck.com, and if you go to Insights, so that's bigduck.com/insights, you'll see blogs. We also have recorded videos about crisis communications right now, how to facilitate great meetings online. We've been posting a lot of free content over the past few weeks designed to help nonprofits adapt to this environment.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to do the same. I have been doing the same. What else after Be Human?
So, okay, so be authentic, be human, use your values. And the last one I want to emphasize is the importance of adapting for the audience you're communicating with. You know, in the marketing and communications world, the jargon for this is segmentation, but you don't have to have the capacity to segment to think about how to adapt for your audience. What I really mean by that is, if you're going to send out an email, if you're going to send out your, you know, end of year appeal. I mean, a lot of organizations with fiscal years that begin July 1 are asking this question right now, you know, what's going to change in my year-end appeal? You know, think about who's on that list and what tone is appropriate for that. So, so in a webinar I gave recently about crisis communications, one of the people who was participating chatted in an example. They said, you know, I've been very offended. I've seen a lot of emails going out that say things like, well, you know, only X% of people will actually become sick from coronavirus, but our disease or our issue affects way more than that. You know, that's an example of the kind of communications that just feels really inappropriate for most audiences. Now that's an extreme example, but the point is to think about who's on that list and what message is going to resonate for them and reflect where they are right now, not just where your organization is. So in my book, Brand Raising, I use this term audience-centric and talk about how many organizations communicate in ways that are organization-centric. We talk about us as an organization, what we need. Communicating in an audience-centric way is about speaking to your audiences, in this case, your donors, in a way that reflects where they are and what you and they connect about, not just what you need as an organization.
Now, you said there are 5 principles. Are you
what am I forgetting? Let's see. Well, okay, you got be authentic, adapt to your audience, be human, use your values. Yeah. Oh, and iterate.
Okay, thank you. Don't shortchange us now. Come on.
Sorry.
Okay. What's your advice around iteration?
Well, so, you know, there are a number of places where organizations plan. Strategic planning is first and foremost, communications planning, fundraising planning, maybe even how you plan out your website and what you're going to, you know, build or change or overhaul on your website. I would say all of those things right now are a little bit up in the air. Probably your strategic plan conceptually is right, but some of the plans you put into place for things you might do this year are no longer going to work. So iterating is a principle that comes from the world of Agile. And it's not something that nonprofits are super familiar with, but basically the idea is that oftentimes when we plan in ways that are kind of fixed, where we assume that there is an outcome or a destination we're trying to reach, and then we kind of work backwards off of it, and we set a plan. We say, okay, if I want to achieve X by December, here's what I need to do in November and October and September and so on and so forth. Yeah. Being iterative basically means seeing your planning work and seeing the work that you're doing is happening in discrete chunks of time or cycles. So maybe your cycle is weekly right now. I would recommend it should be at this time. And that means that every week you should meet with a core team who are the decision-making team around, let's say, fundraising or communications or your organizational work. And every week you talk about what are this week's priorities? How are you going to stay on track with those bigger goals, but what needs to adapt or change given what's actually happening right now? I think we are all at risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater right now. We're either so working so hard to adapt to this current environment that we're losing sight of the bigger picture of what we're building towards, or we're so focused on the bigger picture, we're not necessarily communicating in ways that feel appropriate for what's happening this week. So you have to strike a balance between those two things, and thinking of it as an iterative exercise is I think the practice that helps us get there.
You mentioned, you know, sort of phase 1, phase 2. What's phase 3? I mean, is phase 3? Can we start talking about some of our need and how you might be able? You again talking to the same audience, you know, committed, loyal donors. How you might be able to help us if you're able. Is that the next?
Absolutely, phase? Absolutely. I think it's very appropriate to start talking about the need. if you can do so authentically. There are many organizations that, I spoke to an executive director on Monday who told me that they anticipate their peer-to-peer fundraising season is going to drop significantly, and they're already seeing a 30% decline in other donations. I think it's perfectly appropriate if you're seeing the writing on the wall and things are already happening, or for instance, you're an arts and culture organization and your theater has gone dark or your museum is closed. Absolutely, it's appropriate to start talking about that.
It's hard to know. It's hard to know when that starts, though. When it feels okay to do that.
Yeah, well, that's where I think iterating becomes important too. I mean, if you if you read the New York Times, you might recall about a week ago there was an article about the Metropolitan Museum of Art closing until July and the expected financial impact of that. I believe it was something like $100 million they anticipate as the financial impact of closing their doors for this period of time. So, if you're an organization that's taking steps like that, I think you can really, you know what the numbers are. Or Amy Semple Ward, she knows what the numbers are, from canceling the NTC. Not every organization knows yet, but I do think a lot of organizations know the impact of their community when, their soup kitchen is closed, or people are not able to come in for vital services. So, yeah, I think you need to be out there talking about it, but I don't think you can talk about it in a conclusive way yet because it's still ongoing.
When you do get to that stage, then how do you balance the messaging between your need and compassion for what your donors are feeling on a financial footing?
I think it's definitely an art, not a science. And actually, the session I was going to lead at the NTC about creating kick-ass major donor communications had a whole segment about writing. I think this really comes down to how you write, what kind of tone and style you strike, and how you balance helping your donors envision a brighter tomorrow with the reality of today. There is a sort of a narrative arc that sometimes great speeches have, sometimes great fundraising communications have, where you have to kind of vacillate between envisioning a stronger, brighter tomorrow and contrasting that with the reality of today. Because we don't want to lose our hope. And that's actually one of the pieces of advice that I've been giving people is that, there is actually an opportunity right now, especially if you have staff people who are stuck at home, not doing what they'd normally do. And the opportunity is to plant the seed for a stronger tomorrow, so as you iterate, what does that stronger tomorrow look like? How does your organization want to emerge from this crisis? And, how can you help bring your donors on that journey too?
Yeah, an art, not a science. And you don't want to misstep, and appear tone deaf or insensitive, by the same token, you have your needs that you're trying to convey. It's, if you keep your humanity, that's I'm glad it's one of your principles, write from the heart, maybe share your message with maybe a board member, maybe test it with board members, maybe even close major donors who's going to be the audience. This is a time where I think it's especially valuable to get outside opinion on some of these key communications.
I think it can be. One of the other questions we've been getting a lot that I think is useful to share too, under the topic of being human, is where and when and how to use humor. Because we've seen some examples where humor right now has been really welcome or really, really inappropriate. So a place where it's welcome, for instance, and maybe this isn't humor, but it's definitely charming, is there's a zoo in Chicago that had that video that is on YouTube where they let the penguins out of their exhibit, wander the aquarium, right? Yeah. So that's not outright funny, but it's very charming and it makes you laugh. And that kind of humor is very, very welcome right now. And I think that's one of the reasons we saw that video spread the way it did. where humor, I think, is inappropriate is when it has anything to do with the virus or what people are experiencing right now. I think people are experiencing enormous hardship and challenge, and there's nothing funny about that. So I think you have to be very strategic how you use humor if you're going to do it. And again, that often comes down to great writing and being creative. You know, that example of the Penguins is one of many of a team really, you know, thinking about what this moment presents as an opportunity as opposed to just as a challenge. And that's hard to do, but when you get it right, it's really powerful.
Yeah. We still have some time left. What else do you want to share with our listeners and maybe your listeners? I want to shout out your podcast, Smart Communications Podcast. So for nonprofit radio listeners, you're already podcast listeners. Sarah's the host of Smart Communications Podcast.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, that podcast is mostly interviews with people, very short, all designed to help nonprofits get better and smarter at their communications. There's a range of topics there. You know, I think this is, from a communications point of view, this is a really good time to take stock. And one of the questions that I think is coming up increasingly is, should I be cutting communication? Should I be cutting marketing? Or how to spend with that? And it's been interesting. I started Big Duck 25 or 6 years ago, and there have been periods of time, recessions or 9/11, where people did cut communications. In more recent years, people actually are leaning into communications, in my experience. We found in 2008 and 2009 that we were busier than we had ever been. Now, that's not to say you necessarily have to spend more money or different money, but if you have in-house communications people, I would encourage you to hang on to them and give them new roles and new responsibilities right now. Don't cut them, because those are the people who do help you with the writing, with the design, with the things you're going to need to weather this storm. And when communications gets cut, you really, I think, short circuit your potential to come out of this better. You know, the other organizations that are leaning into communications, they're going to capture that mind share, and that's not necessarily going to set you up for a stronger tomorrow in the long run. So it's a tricky time.
Yeah, no, but you want to keep that long-term view. If you follow my stock advice, you'd buy high and sell low. But people who are much brighter about investing and long-term is, you know, hold what you've got. You know, don't sell. So it's the same advice, because you're in for the long term.
Right.
So people like me need advice like that. So, you know, the analogy to your communication staff, to your fundraising staff as well. You know, you still have a long-term view. You've still got a mission that you're trying to accomplish, goals you want to achieve. You know, this 6-month or even year long, you know, I don't think we're going to be in our homes for a year, but the lingering effects, it's hard to know how long that's going to be. But even if it's a year, it's just a year. You know, you've got a much longer term view, and you want to emerge as strong or stronger. And, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, others are going to fill that space around your mission if you're not communicating at a time when it's, you know, you can show your relevance. You become irrelevant if you stop communicating now. People are going to lose sight of you, and the trust between you and donor is going to be lost.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's well said. And, you know, I'm hearing about a lot of organizations right now who are putting together a sort of a crisis management team. You know, they'll have a board, staff, leadership team who are meeting regularly to make decisions as this crisis unfolds. You know, one thing that I would like to see more of is I'd like to see more organizations putting together the kind of the long-term or the seed planting team too. Because if you've got certain people on your team who are managing the crisis, there may be other people on your team, particularly if you work in a mid-size or larger organization, who can actually start to work ahead and to think about where do you want to be in a year when this is over, or 6 months, or whenever it is, and what are the seeds you can plant now? What are the appeals you can write, the case for support you can write, the website plans you can create, whatever it is, whatever the thing is that you wish you had that you normally don't have time to do in your daily life. Put a team together of staff people who are underutilized right now, and set them to an assignment and work ahead. Those are the kinds of things that, might not be appropriate to release now, but when the timing is right, you'll be so glad that you laid the foundation, and it's just going to help the recovery, come faster for your organization.
Yeah, that's a great place to end, Sarah. And that's, that's capitalizing on something you said earlier, which is finding opportunity in the midst of confusion and crisis. So I'm not gonna deign to rephrase what you just said. You said it beautifully. Look, you're north of the city, I'm south of the city. I look forward to getting together in the city for a drink and hugging.
Me too.
Because you're a gem, and thanks for what you're doing.
I'll toast to you and all of your listeners from Massachusetts. I hope you and everybody else as well.
Thanks, Sarah, and same for you. Stay safe up there, and I look forward to seeing you in the city, close, with a big hug. Sarah Durham, CEO of Big Duck and Advomatic, and thank you for being with us. Tony Martignetti nonprofit radio coverage of what was intended to be 20 NTC, but as I said, I'm releasing this as a special episode. We're sponsored by Cougar Mountain Software. Denali Fund is their complete accounting solution made for nonprofits. Tony.ma/Cougar Mountain for a free 60-day trial. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Tony.